People often look at me like I'm a delicate piece of antique china that might shatter if the wind blows too hard. But they don't realize that inside this weathered exterior, the lights are still burning bright in every single room. My name is David. I am 106 years old, and I have kept my memory sharp, not by luck, but by treating my brain less like a storage unit and more like a muscle that needs to be exhausted every single day. When I was a young man in my 30s, I watched my father disappear into the fog of dementia, and it terrified me more than the war ever did, because at least in the trenches you knew who the enemy was. Watching a man who could once quote Shakespeare from memory forget the names of his own children was a specific kind of heartbreak that settles in your bones and never really leaves. I made a silent vow standing by his bedside that I would do everything in my power to keep the door to my own mind propped open. No matter how heavy the years became, it wasn't about vanity or wanting to be the smartest man in the room. It was about maintaining the dignity of knowing my own story until the very last page. I realized quite early on that the modern world is designed to make us comfortable, and comfort is actually the poison that lulls the brain into a deep, deteriorating sleep. The first thing I changed was my relationship with routine. We are creatures of habit, and while habits are efficient, they are deadly for a mind that wants to stay young. I noticed that most men my age in the 1950s were already settling into a groove so deep it looked like a grave, doing the same things at the same time, eating the same meals, and having the same conversations. I decided to become intentionally inefficient. I drove different routes to work even if it took 10 minutes longer, just so my brain had to process new scenery and navigate new turns. I brushed my teeth with my left hand. I reorganized my workshop every 6 months, and I forced myself to listen to music I didn't initially understand. It felt frustrating at times, but I came to love that frustration because I knew it was the friction of my neural pathways sparking new connections. There is a terrible misconception that as you age, you should simplify your life to save energy, but I found that complexity is what keeps the engine running. When I retired at 65, everyone told me to relax, to sit on the porch, to watch the world go by, and I knew that if I did that, I would be dead or senile within 5 years. Instead, I decided to learn the violin. Now, you have to understand that I have no natural musical talent, and my fingers were already stiffening with the beginnings of arthritis. So it was a miserable experience for the first year. My wife, bless her patient soul, would just turn up the radio while I scratched away in the living room. But the act of reading a new language on the page and translating it through my hands was a workout more intense than any heavy lifting I had done on the construction site. It forced my brain to coordinate vision, touch, hearing, and rhythm all at once. I never became a virtuoso, but I believe that violin is one of the reasons I can still remember the smell of the rain on the day I met my wife. Diet played a role, of course, but not in the way the magazines tell you with their superfoods and expensive supplements. I grew up in a time when food was fuel, not entertainment, and I stuck to that philosophy even when the supermarkets filled up with processed boxes and sugary treats. I treated my stomach like a furnace that needed clean coal. Mostly vegetables I grew myself and fish when we could afford it. But the real secret wasn't just what I ate, but how little I ate. I noticed that when I felt overly full, my thinking slowed down, a mental lethargy would set in, and the edges of the world would get blurry. I made a habit of leaving the table when I could still eat a little more, keeping a certain lightness in my body that seemed to translate to a lightness in my mind. It's hard to stay sharp when your body is devoting all its energy to digestion. And in my opinion, the modern abundance of food is one of the greatest dulling agents of the human intellect. But if I am being truly honest with you, The biggest factor in avoiding the fog wasn't the violin or the vegetables. It was how I handled loneliness and grief. When my wife Eleanor passed away 30 years ago, I felt the darkness waiting for me, tempting me to just shut down and live inside my memories rather than facing the empty chair at the breakfast table. That is the moment when dementia comes for many of us, when the pain of the present becomes so great that the mind decides to retreat into the past or simply check out altogether. I had to physically force myself to stay connected to the living world. I started going to a local philosophy group at the library, surrounded by university students who looked at me like a relic until I started debating them on the nature of Stoicism. I didn't go because I wanted to socialize. I went because I needed to be challenged. I needed to look into people's eyes and follow the thread of a conversation that moved fast. Isolation is the incubator of decay, and you have to fight for connection as if your life depends on it, because it does. I also stopped relying on external tools to do my thinking for me. I see people today who cannot navigate their own neighborhoods without a phone telling them where to turn, or who cannot remember a phone number because it's stored in a contact list. I refuse to let technology become my crutch. If I needed to calculate a tip or a measurement for a carpentry project, I did it on paper or in my head. If I needed to remember a grocery list, I visualized the items in my kitchen cupboards rather than writing them down. I memorized poetry not to show off, but to give my mind something to chew on while I walked. I learned that the brain is essentially lazy. If you give it a chance to outsource a task, it will, and every time you outsource a mental task, you lose a little bit of your capacity. I kept my world analog in a digital age, and while it made me slower than everyone else, it kept my processing power purely my own. Sleep was another non-negotiable territory for me, but not just the duration, the quality of the wind down. I realized decades ago that taking the worries of the day into bed was a recipe for a fragmented mind, so I developed a ritual of reviewing my day in reverse order before I slept. I would sit on the edge of the bed and replay the events from evening back to morning, visualizing the conversations, the meals, the work, and then I would consciously let them go, like placing stones down on the side of a river. It sounds simple, almost childish, but this practice of filing away the day's memories seemed to help my brain organize itself. It meant that when I slept, I really rested, and I woke up with a slate that was clean enough to be written on again. I believe that a lot of memory loss comes from a cluttered mind, a brain so full of unresolved stress and unfiled moments that it simply refuses to take in anything new. There is also a spiritual aspect to this, though I don't necessarily mean religion in the traditional sense. It is about retaining a sense of wonder. Children have perfect memories because everything is new, everything is vivid, and the world is painted in bright colors. As we age, we get cynical. We think we've seen it all, and the world turns gray, and memorable moments become scarce. I made a conscious effort to remain curious, to look at a tree and really see the bark, to ask questions of people that I didn't know the answer to admit when I was wrong and learn something new. The phrase, "I know," is a closing door, whereas "tell me more" is an open window. I have tried to live my life with all the windows open, letting the draft come in, letting the dust get stirred up, because a sterile, sealed-off room is a dead room. I recall a specific afternoon when I was about 92, and I was sitting in the park watching a young father teach his son to ride a bicycle. I felt that familiar tug of fatigue, that seductive whisper, to just close my eyes and drift away, to stop observing. It would have been so easy to become a passive object in that landscape. But I forced myself to watch the mechanics of it, to notice the anxiety in the father's shoulders and the determination in the boy's jaw, to analyze the physics of the balance. I engaged with the scene. I turned it into a story in my head. That active observation is what I call staying behind the wheel. You can be a passenger in your own life, letting the days drive you by, or you can be the driver, gripping the wheel even when your hands are shaking. Dementia, in my view, often starts when we move to the passenger seat and stop paying attention to the road. Now, at 106, my body is undeniably failing. My hearing is fading, my knees protest every step, and my energy comes in short, precious bursts. But my mind is still my own kingdom. I can still recite the poems I learned in school. I can still debate the news with my great-grandson. And I can still feel the sharp, clear edge of joy and sorrow. It hasn't been easy. It has been a daily labor, a constant refusal to take the path of least resistance. People ask me for the secret, hoping for a pill or a specific brand of tea, but the secret is just stubbornness. It is the stubborn refusal to let the light go out. It is the commitment to wake up every morning and give your brain a job to do, even if that job is just remembering the names of the birds at the feeder. If you are watching this and you are afraid of the fog, or if you are watching a loved one disappear into it, know that the brain is more resilient than we give it credit for. It wants to heal, it wants to grow, but it needs you to lead the way. Don't seek comfort, seek challenge. Don't seek silence, seek conversation. Don't retire from life just because you retired from a job. The world is full of wonders that you haven't seen yet, and as long as you keep looking for them, your mind will stay awake to see them. I am 106 years old, and I am still learning, and because I am still learning, I am still here.